The story commences with a statement that we were defeated, followed by a tower collapse and the introduction of the inner gods, who wonder about their fate. The scene then shifts to the great sage Sun Ogong, who expresses that it's not over yet, causing Hercules to question his confidence. Sun Ogong assures them that he is not ready to die, but they are interrupted by the protagonist, Kim Yuan, who brings news of the outer gods' discovery of their location. The inner gods are shocked and saddened when Kim Yuan reveals that a group of inner gods are dead due to the outer gods' foolish chaos. Kim Yuan believes that they cannot defeat the outer gods, but Kronos interrupts him, offering him a chance to go back in time with the Kronos clock to change things. Kim Yuan is hesitant, knowing that Kronos may cease to exist when he returns to the past, but ultimately accepts the task when he realizes he is the only one who can change the tower from the lower floor to the top. The inner gods warn Kim Yuan that they may not recognize him when he returns to the past and exchange a few words with him before he collects the Kronos clock and turns back time. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised to discover that he had lost all his stats and arcane power, causing his body to feel heavy. He realized that he had been reset to level 0 and decided to determine how far back in time he had been sent. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a stranger who punched him in the face. The protagonist was confused by the attack and only recognized the school badge on the stranger's chest, indicating that they were both students at Chung Sal University before the tower appeared. Despite the protagonist's attempt to identify the attacker, the stranger launched another attack, which the protagonist easily evaded. The protagonist offered to forgive the stranger's punches if he could provide today's date, but the stranger was irritated and uninterested in the protagonist's words, launching another attack. The protagonist skillfully countered with an uppercut before noting that the tutorial would begin in 9 hours. Following a quick transition to the Hongdae area, we are shown the individual who was beaten by the protagonist, revealed to be Kim Myung-hoon, who appears genuinely furious. Kim then joins some acquaintances at a restaurant who beckon him over, and after sitting down, he immediately drinks a beverage. After some light-hearted teasing, Kim's friends inquire about his altercation with the protagonist. With a scowl, he recounts being physically assaulted and ridiculed by the protagonist, prompting him to vow to exact revenge. The scene then shifts back to the main storyline, where Kim lies to his friends about having successfully beaten the protagonist, leading to further celebration and imbibing of alcohol. The scene then shifts to Kim Myung and his friends deliberating outside about having a third drink. However, their discussion is abruptly interrupted when one of them notices the protagonist carrying a luggage bag. Perplexed by the protagonist's seemingly fine state, they decide to approach him and say hello, which excites Kim Myung as it presents an opportunity for revenge. As they prepare to gang up on the protagonist, he appears unbothered and informs them that it's almost midnight, urging them to enjoy the next 3 minutes since it will be hell after. This statement shocks Kim Myung, and he questions what the protagonist means while the latter drops his bag. In a state of disbelief, Kim Myung watches as the protagonist reveals dangerous weapons from the bag, leading him to believe that the protagonist brought them to beat them up. While Kim Myung questions the protagonist's sanity, his frightened friends plead for him to apologize. As the protagonist loads his bag and arms himself, he slowly approaches Kim Myung and his friends, frightening them while declaring in his mind that it begins now. At the stroke of midnight, a massive glitch rips through the entire area, catching everyone's attention. The protagonist then informs Myung and his friends that their 3 minutes are up, and a system notification suddenly appears, indicating that the tutorial is about to begin, and they must survive the zombie hordes for the next 30 minutes. While everyone is stunned to see zombies appear, the protagonist wonders why so many zombies have spawned and questions if it's because of the tutorial's difficulty setting. Without much thought, the protagonist is suddenly equipped with a knife and urged by the system to activate his status window by saying the activation phrase. While everyone ponders their given weapons, the protagonist drops his knife and takes out a mysterious liquid from his bag, splashing it on his knife before immediately charging at the zombies, killing them and leveling up in the process. As the protagonist continues to destroy the zombies, the surviving bystanders watch in awe, wondering if the zombies are weak. However, as one man takes his axe and strikes a zombie, he discovers that it deals no damage and is soon killed by the zombie. The scene then shifts to the protagonist, who explains that normal strength cannot defeat the zombies, and although they may appear slow and weak, they possess incredibly strong skin. As the protagonist battles on, he recalls an event from his past where a man told him that he has fewer talents than most people. The protagonist then asked how the man survived the first tutorial, to which he replied that he worked on a salt farm and discovered that the zombies were weak to salt during the first tutorial. The scene shifts back to the protagonist, whose battle is interrupted by a system notification congratulating him on defeating 100 zombies in just 10 minutes. The system then displays the protagonist's earned unallocated stats, which he had never received before in the tutorial. Initially, he considers using them, but ultimately decides to save them for later since he doesn't need them against the zombies. With only 10 minutes left to survive the zombie attack, he searches for a good spot to hunt. Suddenly, the protagonist's attention is drawn to Kim Myung, who seems to be holding his own against the zombies. However, he is shocked to discover that his attacks are ineffective against the zombies, and wonders how the protagonist was able to kill them so easily. As the zombie close in on him, Kim Myung pushes it away before fleeing for his life. His friends call out to him, asking where the protagonist is, stating that if they can stick with him they might be able to survive the zombie attack. Making Kim Myung also wonders where the protagonist has gone. As the battle continues, Kim Myung battles with the zombies, however his weapon breaks, and as the zombie is about to deliver a fatal blow, they all begin to melt away. The other survivors are shocked as a white substance begins to fall from the sky, and Kim Myung tastes it to discover that it is salt. The scene then shifts back to the protagonist, who is seen leveling up as he runs while pouring salt from his bag. The protagonist comes to a stop as a notification pops up, stating that the first tutorial has ended with only 4,007 survivors. The system calculates the number of enemies killed by the protagonist, which is 1,427, and later allocates 1,427 points to him. To the protagonist's surprise, the system awards him an additional 1,000 points for achieving something impossible, causing him to realize that he had killed a lot of enemies. He decides to check their stats and are stunned by the total amount of points he earned. Shortly after, the system informs them that the second tutorial will commence momentarily. As the protagonist ponders in thoughts, he is soon interrupted by the sound of someone greeting all the survivors of the first tutorial. The person congratulates them for passing the first tutorial and is shocked to see so many survivors. The person then explains that they are there to make an announcement that was meant to be given after the second tutorial but had to be given now because someone leveled up too quickly. The protagonist realizes that the person is a lackey and listens as they explain the two major ways to use points: by purchasing items at the shop or using them as currency to exchange with others by shaking hands. While the protagonist is still deliberating, the lackey bids them farewell before the system displays a sphere-like field, which turns out to be a safe zone. The system urges the survivors to enter and promises to distribute 100 points to all survivors every 3 hours. With this, the system then announces that the second tutorial will commence. The sight of a safe zone left everyone surprised, while Myung and his group pondered about the whereabouts of the protagonist. Soon, Myung spotted the protagonist and rushed towards him, stopping him to question why he was leaving the safe zone. The protagonist, unaffected by his words, urged Myung to return to the safe zone and not follow him, reminding him of his place. The protagonist then left, leaving Myung visibly angered. As Myung entered the safe zone, he discovered that the others outside were blocked from entering, and a system notification stated that the room capacity was limited to 2038, shocking him. Suddenly, giant worm monsters emerged from the ground and began killing everyone outside the safe zone. The scene then shifted to the protagonist, who easily defeated the monsters. He explained that these monsters, called earthworms, hunted their prey by digging through the ground and were invisible to the naked eye. Closing his eyes, the protagonist focused on his other senses and quickly attacked an earthworm that attempted to attack him, slicing it into pieces. This earned the protagonist a significant level up from the system, exciting him greatly. Next, the protagonist heads towards an underground subway station, noting that earthworms tend to live underground in caves where they build their nests. Recognizing this, he decides that it is the most suitable location to hunt for earthworms. Suddenly, the system notifies the protagonist that he has discovered a hidden dungeon and awards him 100 points. Excited to have found the earthworm nest, the protagonist decides to begin his hunt and level up to level 20. The protagonist effortlessly slices through the earthworms with swift and precise blows, surprised to find marbles coming out of them, which he didn't expect to obtain in the second tutorial. Excited by this unexpected discovery, he becomes even more determined to hunt the earthworms. Suddenly, the scene cuts to outside, where earthworms are killing people indiscriminately. The survivors inside the safe zone are horrified by the chaos they witness. 3 hours pass, and the system allocates 100 points to the survivors. However, the system then informs them that the red region will be activated, reducing the safe zone capacity to 1500. Moreover, when the safe zone reaches its maximum capacity, the system will randomly expel some survivors from it. The news causes chaos and panic among the survivors, with many attempting to enter the safe zone. However, MANHWA urges everyone to be quiet and explains that they need to decide who to kill in order to survive from now on. Myung realizes that he may be expelled from the safe zone if he does not act fast. He grabs an old man and announces that he will kill him, hoping to prevent himself from being expelled. The scene then shifts back to the protagonist, who finishes off the earthworms in the subway and successfully levels up to level 20, awakening his arcane power. He reviews his rewards and the system asks him if he wants to allocate his unassigned stats. The protagonist agrees, and his arcane power increases. He emphasizes the importance of arcane power, stating that it will serve as the foundation for any future power he may attain. While contemplating his next move, the protagonist calls out to someone who was watching him. It turns out to be the lackey from earlier, who is surprised that the protagonist noticed him. They exchange pleasantries and congratulations for hitting level 20 before the protagonist reveals that he wants to browse through the shop, shocking the lackey as he explained that he wanted to buy some skills. The lackey then opened the shop and praised him for being the first to purchase a skill in the second tutorial. He encouraged the protagonist to select a skill, but when the protagonist asked if there were more options available, the lackey informed him that those were the only skills available in the tutorial. The lackey asked if the protagonist had a specific skill in mind, but the protagonist replied vaguely to avoid drawing attention to himself. He ultimately chose the skill, Monkey Eyes, despite the lackey's warning that it wasn't a great skill. The protagonist spent 2000 points to acquire the skill and then obtained the Arcane Sword skill, which the lackey congratulated him on. After bidding farewell, the protagonist wondered if the lackey would surveil him as a special administrative target, but he dismissed the thought since he hadn't broken any rules. He was only concerned about his return, which was created by powerful entities whose involvement had been erased as a penalty for using the item. He then explains that even if anyone were to notice while activating his monkey eyes, he stated that his goal wouldn't change. Realizing that the monkey's eyes held greater value elsewhere, the protagonist decides to improve their proficiency. Despite having less than 30 minutes left, the protagonist deems it sufficient time and activates an arcane skill to prepare for the boss battle with the second tutorial's mother worm. While unintentionally crushing one of her offspring with his legs, the protagonist surprises the mother worm and explains her strong attachment to her young. The mother worm attacks in a dash, but the protagonist easily dodges and prepares to take her down with one blow. The battle commences with the protagonist swiftly and accurately attacking the mother worm. When she attempts to flip over and bite him, he expertly dodges and counters with another devastating strike. As the protagonist finds himself in midair with no other option, the mother worm tries to bite him, but he successfully strikes her by slicing through her mouth. Afterwards, the setting returns to the safe zone outside, where a man pleads with Myung for mercy. Myung responds by pushing him, emphasizing the agreement that everyone had made to sacrifice someone else instead. As those who were to be expelled outside started to grumble, the remaining time for the tutorial began to decrease rapidly. Suddenly, a notification appeared, announcing that the second tutorial had ended and that the safe zone would no longer shrink, giving them 600 points as reward and stating that they have 15 hours until the second tutorial is finalized. The scene transitions to the protagonist, who is seen conversing with the lackey. The lackey offers to heal the protagonist, but he declines the offer. However, the lackey continues to praise the protagonist, which irritates him. The protagonist explains that the lackey, who is responsible for managing the tutorial, probably did not anticipate the killing of the earthworm, the creature that maintains the ecosystem of the second tutorial. Therefore, there might not be a predetermined reward. The protagonist then requests his reward from the lackey, but he starts to babble instead. This annoys the protagonist, and he presses the lackey for his reward, leaving him stunned. The lackey presents the protagonist with 3 options: skipping to the 5th tutorial with rewards and information from the 3rd and 4th tutorials, acquiring points, or connecting the protagonist with Olympus. The 3rd option greatly surprises the protagonist. The lackey advises the protagonist to select the 3rd option, as Olympus is one of the organizations that govern the tower. The protagonist is stunned and finds it hard to believe. Although borrowing their power could help him climb the tower faster, he chooses to go with the second option, which is to earn points. This decision greatly surprises the lackey. The protagonist acquires 10,000 points, but the lackey continues to be shocked and urges him to reconsider his decision. As the lackey tries to persuade the protagonist, he remains disinterested and explains that the last option was probably not discussed with the other lackeys and was definitely not approved by the administrator. The lackey is surprised that the protagonist knows what an administrator is and asks how. However, the protagonist starts saying things that are out of this world, leaving the lackey astonished and wondering who he is to possess so much information. The protagonist requests a meeting with the administrator for 1,000 points, which the administrator accepts. As the protagonist wonders why Olympus is involved with the lackey despite the tutorial being separate from the tower, he is interrupted by a bright flash of light. The administrator appears, mocking the protagonist for requesting a meeting with just 1,000 points. The protagonist introduces himself, and the administrator recognizes him as the one who killed over 1,000 undead. The administrator asks how the protagonist knew about him and how to request a meeting, but the protagonist recites the first law of the tutorial, stating that all information about the tower must be obtained by the participant's own abilities and not given by the administrator or tower. The administrator is initially speechless but eventually confirms it. The protagonist explains that Olympus contacted the lackeys and offered him sponsorship as a reward, while the lackey trembles in fear behind him and tries to explain things to the administrator. The administrator instantly smashes the lackey to the floor and kills him, angered by Olympus trying to spread its influence to the tutorial. He thanks the protagonist but is soon cut off as the protagonist narrates the second rule of the tutorial, which states that all achievements by the participants must be compensated by a reward of equal merit. Since he used a fair amount of points to call the administrator and hunt an unfaithful lackey, he deserves fair compensation. The administrator finds the protagonist interesting and compliments him. He decides to reward the protagonist and offers a handshake. Upon shaking hands with the administrator, the protagonist obtains the skill, Master of Mana, which greatly shocks him as it increases his mana recovery rate, resistance and mana sensitivity, and arcane power. The administrator then bids farewell to the protagonist, hoping they can meet again in the third tutorial. The protagonist is taken aback by the sudden acquisition of the skill, Master of Mana, causing him to question how a skill of such rank could appear in the tutorial. However, he sets aside these thoughts and focuses on improving his proficiency, testing his newfound skill by creating a mana blast and striking various parts of the underground subway. Amazed by the power of the skill, he wonders whether he should thank the Olympics for it. Realizing that his current strength is not enough to defeat the outer gods, he resolves to fight the earthworm once more with only 13 hours and 25 minutes remaining before the second tutorial is finalized. As the second tutorial is about to end in 10 minutes, the scene shifts outside where a group of people in the safe zone discuss whether there will be a third and fourth tutorial or if the safe zone will disappear. One individual complains incessantly, but Myung, annoyed by his banter, grabs him and begins explaining some facts. Suddenly, someone spots the protagonist from afar, and they shout a warning as an earthworm appears. However, the protagonist easily defeats it with a single kick, astonishing everyone. With only 5 minutes left until the second tutorial is over, the protagonist urges them to continue their discussion and not mind him, giving them a menacing stare. The protagonist, who had only returned to obtain the clear reward, is shocked to see some individuals acting like leaders. Myung soon approaches the protagonist, asking where he had been and expressing his worry. The protagonist asks if Myung forced the survivors to get supplies, but he explains that it was for everyone's benefit. The protagonist finds it strange, but Myung urges him to listen up, explaining that, in order to survive in their current world, a person must be cowardly and selfish since nothing else matters anymore. Soon after the completion of the second tutorial, a notification popped up indicating that rewards had been allocated. The protagonist bid farewell but left a warning for Myung not to cross the line, leaving Myung shocked. The third tutorial began immediately, instructing the survivors to kill 50 monsters and collect 50 essence within 72 hours. They were also informed that all monsters would disappear once the time limit expired, and a gate with a capacity of 50 would open in 70 hours. The survivors were stunned by this news, including Myung, who was terrified at first but soon prepared the others for battle. In another scene, the protagonist emptied the marbles obtained from killing the earthworms, which turned out to be mana essence. As monsters approached, the protagonist created a new skill called Mana Blast, and used it to destroy all the monsters, surprising even himself. He then collected more mana essence and got ready to face a swarm of monster rats. On the second day of the third tutorial, the scene shifts to two men and a woman walking down the subway. One man is named Han Junho and is a level 10 survivor, while the other man, Kong Sungchan, and the woman, Lim Juyan Chan, are also level 10 survivors. They spot a convenience store and excitedly decide to stock up on food. As they discuss their plans, Han is suddenly attacked by a spider monster from above and is killed instantly, greatly shocking Juyan and Sungchan. They are then ambushed by a swarm of monsters, causing them to panic. Juyan, filled with fear, wonders if they can take on the monsters. While frozen in fear, she is attacked by a rat but manages to dodge it upon hearing Sungchan scream her name. However, they are overpowered by the monsters, and Juyan is about to be killed when the protagonist unexpectedly arrives and saves her by throwing a soda can at the monster, seeming annoyed at being woken up.